Hi everyone, I hope you're having a great day. Welcome to Loft 801. My name is Diego, and this video is a review of Disney's Ms. Marvel. It's a 6-part series that started streaming on June 8th, 2022, and its last episode aired July 13th. It's been a fun show for me, but before I hop into my review, if you want to support the channel, please take a second to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. It's really appreciated. This review will contain spoilers, so if you haven't finished or seen the show, please click out of this video. However, if you don't care about spoilers, you're more than welcome to stay. Lastly, if there's something you want to see reviewed, please leave a comment down below and we'll get to it. Thank you. We're hopping in 3, 2, 1. I want to start off by saying I was pleasantly surprised by this show. For context, I've enjoyed the previous Disney Marvel shows, but I haven't been too impressed with them. Most of them are around a 7 or an 8 out of 10 for me. Going into this show, I didn't know much about Ms. Marvel and her powers or backstory. So in that aspect, I was open to seeing how things panned out, but I was mostly skeptical. Also, the trailers for the show didn't really impress me, and I was expecting it to be about another 7 out of 10. Episode 1 turned my expectations upside down. Something I truly loved about the show is the insane amount of editing and color in it. Things pop out, especially in this episode. I genuinely felt like it was a comic book come to life. To me, it felt like a mix between Diary of a Wimpy Kid and Sony's Into the Spider-Verse. Super fun. Something I didn't like too much in this episode was Kamala's discovery of her powers. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but it came off a little bit cheesy with the acting and special effects. On the upside, I love the cast. Every character feels relatable to me, and the cast has amazing chemistry together. As a fellow immigrant to the United States, I can see a lot of similarities between Kamala and her family and mine. Growing up, I felt like my parents didn't quite understand American culture, and given our Guatemalan roots, were too protective of me. Like Kamala, I obviously loved my parents, but felt constrained. Another thing I love about episode 1 is the general tone and energy. Like Guardians of the Galaxy, it's fun and quirky in a way that works. Something that isn't necessarily a criticism, but I wasn't too big a fan of, was the mid-credit scene. It hinted at a subplot in the show where a government agency is the antagonist. I'm starting to feel burnt out on government agencies being antagonists because they don't typically allow for deeply emotional stories. Anyways, overall, I gave the episode a 9.2. Moving on, a lot of the good things from episode 1 actually carried over into episode 2. The tone, color, editing, themes, and much more. In fact, as we discuss later episodes, a lot of these things carry over, but just for you guys, I'll try and cover unique things. I kind of like the training sequence between Kamala and Bruno. It's a bit like Peter Parker and Ned, and you can see that the characters have a strong friendship. Something I was a bit iffy about was the introduction of Kamran. Actor Rish Shah is cool and great, but it's pretty obvious that Kamala's gonna fall for him. And plus, she's low-key curving my boy Bruno. I didn't mention it for episode 1, but both that episode and this one do a great job of portraying life outside of your typical American home. Being able to see how different cultures function, specifically Muslim Pakistanis, helps give me an appreciation for my upbringing and the freedoms I had. I think this episode does a good job of representing diversity because it feels natural. It might be a culture shock to some, but I think it's a good way to start learning about others. Hopping off my soapbox, something I didn't like about this episode was when Kamala used her powers to save the boy who fell from the mosque balcony. First off, who the hell leans backwards 90 degrees out of a window 10 plus stories up? Secondly, where were that boy's parents? How did he even get up there? And lastly, I'm not a huge fan of the way Kamala's powers look/manifest. In some scenes, the special effects remind me of 2011's Green Lantern. I don't know if there's a good way to do the CGI, but I still think it could be improved a bit. So overall, I gave this episode an 8.8. Episode 2 finished on a bit of a cliffhanger, so I like that episode 3 quickly wrapped it up. I like the introduction of Kamran's mother Najma and the other clandestines, aka Jinn. I love that they come from another dimension tied to Earth. It's very similar to Shang-Chi's Ta Lo, and I believe it sets the groundwork for a big crossover. Something else that I liked was that Kamala's bracelet could actually be Kree technology. Again, I think this ties into Shang-Chi and hints that his 10 rings could also be Kree tech. Something that I liked but felt went on a little too long was Amir and Taisha's wedding. There was a dance scene that just never ended. In all fairness, it was fun, just a little long. Another thing that I didn't like was the rapid progression from friend to foe that Najma and the other Jinn had. It felt a bit too sudden, and it would have been nice to see that progression develop over another episode. Going back to something I did like, it was cool to see Kamala showcase her powers against the Jinn. However, a downside to this was that Kamala conveniently and successfully fought the Jinn. I don't think that a 16-year-old girl who just discovered her powers could take on several expert warriors who have had decades of fighting experience. On that note, it might seem a little bit contradictory to what I previously said, but I love how ruthless and serious serious the Jinn are about getting the bracelet back. It helps raise the stakes and makes the show feel a bit more believable. Overall, I also gave this episode a 9.2. Yeah. I filmed this video in 2 parts. What can I say? It takes me a while to edit and I wanted to get a head start. Didn't work out too well anyways because this video is a week and a half late. Anyways, episode 4 takes us away from Jersey City and to Karachi. I loved Jersey City, but it's a pleasant departure because it introduces us to several new characters. I'm a huge Assassin's Creed fan, so meeting the Red Daggers made me really happy because it gave me a sense of nostalgia. On the other hand, something I didn't quite like about the Red Daggers was that there were so few of them. I would have loved to see a few more of them to rival the Jinn. Something I really loved about this episode was how some of the Jinn died. It showed that they aren't invincible and they risk the same stakes as others. On that note, I didn't like how Waleed died. He was barely introduced to us and I wish we could have gotten one more episode with him. I enjoyed the backstory and emotions we got from Muniba and her mother Sana. It helps explain why Muniba is so strict with Kamala. Another thing I liked but felt like it dragged on a little too much was the chase between Kamala, Kareem, and the surviving Jinn. Additionally, at some points, there were some unrealistic and cheesy moments. Finishing the episode off strong for me, I liked how Kamala was sent into a vision of the partition. Overall, I really enjoyed this episode and I gave it a 9.4. I love the way episode 5 started in an old-timey manner. The newsreel made the episode feel more authentic and genuine when showing the partition. In today's times, we often forget to look back on historical events to see how they affect us today, especially in places where we don't live. For me, this episode was a good reminder that for better or worse, the British Empire played a significant role in history. I like the backstory with Aisha and seeing her life play out. Initially, the acting felt a little bit stiff, but that may have been tied to her character. Seeing her choose to make a home on Earth rather than try to go back to her old one was powerful. If Najma had done the same, things may have turned out differently for her in this episode. Something I didn't like about this episode was seeing Aisha be killed off without using her powers. It felt like a missed opportunity. However, despite this, I like how Kamala asked Najma to not rob her son of family like she did Aisha. Another thing I didn't quite like was how Najma just gave herself up to the veil. It was rushed and felt like a missed opportunity for something meaningful. However, I do like that the veil is more dangerous than the Jinn realized, killing 2 of them. Ending the episode on some good notes, I love that Muniba finally sees Kamala's powers and is actually proud and supportive of her. It felt slightly contrary to how her character had been previously portrayed, but it was a heartfelt moment. I also love that Bruno and Kamran finally become friends. I was curious to see how their friendship would further develop. Lastly, I loved the soundtrack in this episode, especially during the end credits. I apologize for butchering this, but the song Tujum by Nasibo Lal was perfect. Overall, I gave this episode an 8.3. I felt like episode 6 did a good job of wrapping up the series. For starters, I really enjoyed the soundtrack with my favorite song being Indian Summer by Jai Wolf. I also got a good chuckle when Kamala's family pretended to not know her secret. Family gossip spreads quick. One of my biggest takeaways from this episode was echoed in the line, just because someone treats you as their enemy doesn't give you the right to treat them as yours. While I may not necessarily agree with it, I think it's a good mantra for living a satisfied life. Something I thought was silly in this episode were the stormtrooper-esque damage control officers. It's hard for me to suspend my disbelief because they could have taken out the heroes without any issue. I get the Home Alone vibe, but that only works with 2 idiots like Harry and Marv, not 100 trained agents. Something else that I didn't like about this episode was the CGI for Kamala's powers. I know I already mentioned it, but it looked goofy to me. I was also disappointed that we didn't get to see more of Kamran's powers. It would have been cool to see him completely turn into a villain. Throughout the series, we got to see the origins of Kamala's suit and name, and I like how they culminated in this episode. It was a bit cheesy, but I liked it. Something that I really loved is that the mutants are confirmed to be in the MCU, but I wish they would have been introduced in a different way. Maybe I'm biased because I grew up with Wolverine and Magneto, but I think a big name like them would have generated more excitement for me. In true Marvel fashion, this episode left me curious about what would happen next with Miss Marvel and Captain Marvel. I'm predicting a Kree war. Despite some criticisms, I thought this episode was amazing and I gave it a 9. Overall, I thought this show was really fun. I felt like the series started off really strong with the first and second episodes having some intense editing. Unfortunately, throughout the series, the editing and special effects seem to appear less and be of lower quality. This bummed me out because the editing and comic book appearance of the show is what really caught my attention. I loved its mix of Diary of a Wimpy Kid and Sony's Into the Spider-Verse and wish the whole show would have felt that way. When it came to themes, I felt like I could relate to Kamala and her family since I'm also an immigrant to the US. I saw a lot of similarities between her family and mine. I thought the show did a wonderful job of exposing audiences to Pakistani and Indian culture, and I would love to see more Ms. Marvel content. I fell in love with the vibrant colors in the show, and the humor didn't feel forced to me. I felt like the CGI and some plot elements could have been improved, but to summarize my thoughts, I thought it was an amazing show. I gave it a 9 out of 10, and I would recommend watching it. Thank you so much for listening to my review of Ms. Marvel. If you enjoyed the content and want to support the channel, don't forget to leave a like and hit subscribe. If you agree or disagree with me, let me know in the comments. I'd love to read what you have to say. If there's something you want me or my friends to review, let us know and we'll get to it. Lastly, if you want to see some more from me, you can check out my vlogs linked up above or my podcast, Friends with Benefits. My name is Diego, and I'll see you next time.